fantasy football running back, wide receiver, quarterback tiers. You've probably been hearing a lot about tiers lately. So if you type in fantasy football tiers, you'll get a lot of garbage. So I've brought up a few of these. CBS, Fantasy Football Nerd, I have CBS, I've got one of. Let's just take a quick look. Here, let's start with ESPN. So this was the link for the ESPN site, and I looked at it, and I'm trying to figure out what do they consider a tier. So they got their updated fantasy football tiered rankings, and I read through the article, and I'm like, well, what do you consider a tier? And if you read it, you'll find out that a tier is whatever they say a tier is, and basically it's then you have to go to their cheat sheets and pay $5 to find out what a tier is. You got to subscribe to get this content. Um, and then I came to CBS Sportsline, and it's pretty much the same thing. Here we got Dave Richards. Listen to Dave's podcast. Very entertaining guy. Not so great at math. I read through this article as well. What's a tier? Tier is what he says it is. The top tier, he just skips right through it. He's like, well, the top tier running backs, it's like they totally skip over what is a tier? How do you define a tier? Another one, Fantasy Pros, wide receiver rankings in tiers. Then you come down here and you're like, they get right into it. Here's my tier one, Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams, Julio Jones. How did you What's your methodology? Well, I mean, like, and the methodology is that these guys are journalists, they're scouts, they know a lot about football. They don't know anything about mathematics. They don't know what an actual tier is. A tier is they're just using the term, and they don't understand that it doesn't mean what they think it means. That word you're using has a meaning. And what it is a cluster analysis. So if you come in here to RoboCoach and you see we have tiered rankings here, and if you want, you can see the definitions. We'll define what the tiers are. In fact, the algorithm is out there on uh, GitHub, I think, and you can contribute. It's a k-means clustering algorithm. So if you want to use the algorithm, you may, and it's not too difficult if you know a little bit about computer programming. But basically, here's your tiers. You've got this column here, RoboCoach gives a prediction for each one of these players based upon your point forecast, the teams in your league. So it's going to be like a VBD scarcity based forecast. And there's a lot of things. If you want to read up about what goes into the algorithm, RoboCoach's algorithm, you're welcome to read up. It's all there. So, but you can see this, you got this dark line between McCaffrey, Ezekiel, and then this group below them. That's a tier. Robo is saying we've got this tier. It's called the 487 tier. Why did Robo call it the 487 tier? Well, because mathematically speaking, 471 and 530 are close to this point called 487. And based upon some fairly sophisticated mathematics, they figure that these two, McCaffrey and Zeke, group together better than if they tried to squeeze, let's say, Aaron Jones into that top tier. If you try to squeeze Aaron Jones in that top tier, then the numbers don't work out. Okay, so without getting too deeply into, math and numbers and things like that, it's really just trust the k-means clustering algorithm. It's been proven to work. Scientists use it. It's used all over the place. Okay, what it is math, And these two are in a cluster, and it's based upon actual numbers and the distance between players based upon those numbers. So the second group here is the 411 tier. And that means that their point predictions cluster around 411. So look at how big this second tier is. Now, mathematically speaking, what it's telling you is that yes, they all cluster around that particular number, but since we're talking about numbers that are predictions, that the sensitivity of the prediction is such that there's no way to really say that Saquon is the last in this tier or that Jones is the first in this tier. This is saying these players are very similar, and at the end of the year, they're probably going to all be very similar in a second tier. And so that's very important strategically because that means you can take anybody in this tier and expect to get the same output from them, expect to get the same output from them as anybody else in that tier. You wouldn't bet anybody confidently that your second tier guy, Joe Mixon, would beat somebody else's second tier guy, Chris Carson. Why? Because they're both in the same tier. You could flip a coin and yeah, one will finish better or worse, but they're in the same tier. However, you could more confidently say, based upon the numbers, that McCaffrey and Zeke are going to beat these second tier guys. That's what cluster analysis is telling you, is that there's a significant difference between these two guys and these 8 guys or these 10 guys. First tier, second tier. It's math, okay? And back to these celebrity journalists, these, here Eric Carabell, these guys are great. They're very entertaining to listen to, and they know a lot. But we're talking about a game of numbers and strategy. And you wouldn't, if you were going to play a game like, say, chess, you wouldn't ask the reporter who's covering the chess match how to win the game. And these days, you wouldn't even ask the chess master. You wouldn't ask Gary Kasparov, how do you win this game, Gary? The person that you would ask would be the computer, the one that's beating Gary Kasparov. The computer knows how to win, and there's so much math going on behind it that even the computer would just say, just move this player. And it would be too complicated for you to understand. Just do it, and you'll win. And like other games, it's the computers have taken over. And so don't ask the reporter how to win at the game of chess. Don't ask these fantasy football reporters how to win at the game of fantasy football. Allow the computer to do the work for you because honestly, they're better than human beings these days. And I think that's been proven over and over again with many different kinds of games. So anyway, I'm getting out a little bit of a rant here, but bottom line is a tier is not what a journalist says a tier is. A tier isn't what a tier has a mathematical definition. You're not going to get it at ESPN, even if you pay the $5. You're not going to get it at CBS. You're not going to get it at Fantasy Pros. You will get it at FantasyFootballDraft.com from RoboCoach, and it'll be based upon your numbers. It'll be based upon your team, your league, your everything. That's it. This has been Dr. RoboCoach. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe. And please like, and if you got this far, send an email to robocoach@fantasyfootballdraft.com and say that you watched this, and I will give you a free subscription. Thank you.